All right. Welcome, everyone, and thank you for attending today's webinar. Again, my name is Tyler Curry. I'm a cyber threat intelligence analyst with the Health ISAC, and I will be introducing today's speaker. Today's webinar includes valuable information on how healthcare organizations can leverage their security features of their Microsoft 365 E5 access to its fullest potential against the threat landscape, providing insight from real-world examples and case studies to showcase how the platform can effectively protect against ransomware and other cyber threats. Just a few housekeeping notes to go over before we get started. Today's webinar will be recorded and made available for future use. Also, feel free to provide any questions that you may have, as we've set aside some time at the conclusion of this webinar to answer some Q&A. And on that note, I'll pass it over to our speaker, Gareth Young, founder and chief architect of Love the Cloud.
Awesome, appreciate it. Thanks very much. All right. So yeah, thanks everyone for joining today. Had to fiddle around there and find my mute button for a second, but I think we're good to go now. So I'm going to drop off camera here now that everyone's seen my face, just because it's a little bit distracting, and we'll kind of dive in. Now, throughout the kind of pandemic, we really did see the adoption of cloud technologies such as Microsoft 365 E5 increase significantly. And in the kind of subsequent years since everything went remote in 2020, and some organizations kind of gradually came back, our sort of personal experience has been that some organizations who kind of made that investment have not really maximized the use of those tools, and in some cases don't even really realize what they have in the suite of tools that they've kind of paid for. So through this webinar, we're going to show you how to use these tools to protect your organization from ransomware attacks, which are definitely one of those ones that seems to be top of mind for a lot of security leaders. Now, just to take a step back, what is ransomware? So it's a malicious software that encrypts files and systems. Victims lose access to their data, and that not only affects the organization but individuals as well. The attackers demand ransom, typically in cryptocurrencies, in exchange for the decryption key. And quite commonly, attackers will exfiltrate data from your environment prior to encrypting it and threaten to sell it or leak it if the ransom's not paid. So that's what we would term a double extortion ransomware attack. Now, CISA advises against paying ransoms, and they recommend focusing on the prevention and strong cybersecurity practices instead. So one sort of example of a real-world ransomware attack that happened in the last few years against healthcare was back in September of 2020. Universal Health Services, they fell victim to a Ryuk ransomware attack, and that actually affected all 400 of their care sites across the United States. The attack caused EHR outages at all of their care sites. It lasted about 3 weeks. Now, fortunately, patient care was maintained throughout the downtime because they had some procedures defined, to handle that situation. But the attack actually resulted in significant financial consequences, approximately 67 million in lost operating income, I think. And labor expenses, recovery expenses. I think all in, the revenue was negatively impacted by about $51.3 million. Now, this example, this attack on UHS, it really does highlight the need for healthcare organizations to adopt proactive security measures like Zero Trust, which we're going to talk a little bit about today as well, to protect your systems and your patient data from future ransomware attacks. So let's kind of break it down and talk a little bit about the anatomy of a ransomware attack. So first off, the kind of reconnaissance and target selection phase. So the threat actors will identify potential targets, and they begin this kind of data gathering phase so that they can plan for the attack. Now, once they've done that, we get into initial access. And that can happen through a few different mechanisms. It can be from a phishing email, a malicious site that a user accesses, or even through vulnerable software in the environment. Once the threat actor has kind of gained access to the environment, their goal at that point is to move laterally through it and escalate their privileges. So essentially, the ransomware will establish a connection with the command and control attacker's server, and it will propagate through the environment, but kind of in a way that, you know, goes unnoticed in the beginning. Because as I said, a lot of times they'll look to exfiltrate your data for use in those sort of double extortion attacks. And really, the aim is for them to access as much data and as many systems as possible. Once they've kind of, you know, gained that foothold and they're at that point, that's when they would actually deploy the ransomware payload itself. And, you know, it can, again, still remain undetected for certain time periods until they're really ready to encrypt all of the systems. And some types of ransomware will even target backup systems in an effort to kind of thwart any data restoration attempts. I mean, I've even actually heard of some ransomware going after the version history of your files inside of OneDrive and stuff like that as well. So it's nasty stuff if it's not, you know, you don't have some layers of protection in there to safeguard yourself. Now, you know, generally speaking, when this happens, the organization is going to be caught off guard. And speed is really critical for mitigation of these attacks. Because what's going to happen is the attacker is going to, you know, demand ransom in exchange for decryption or halting of the attack, because they might still be continuing to go through the environment. And if you refuse, you know, this is where we get into the double extortion and triple extortion. If you refuse and say, well, no, I'm just going to restore from backup, that's where they may start to threaten and say, well, we have a copy of your data, pay us or we're going to leak it. Or the kind of triple extortion is where they start to go to the level of, we're going to actually go after the people that we've identified in the PII that we stole from you. So it can get very, very messy for sure. And that's why, you know, I say speed is critical for mitigation. You know, having a robust recovery plan. You know, you can have all the security tools in the world, and we're certainly going to show you the ones that you might have in your arsenal today that can reduce the risk significantly, but you still need to be prepared for that worst case scenario with a plan to not only, you know, reverse the damage, but restore operations as well. And I mean, it's recommended to avoid paying the ransom, but unfortunately, many organizations do, just because that's the kind of situation that they're put into. So, you know, going beyond that, now that we've sort of understood a little bit about what ransomware is and, you know, how one of these attacks generally happens at a high level, let's start to talk a little bit about Microsoft 365 E5 itself. It adds a lot of additional security and compliance capability over the E3 license. And like I said, we've got a lot of customers that we work with and, you know, do some adoption work with who are like, wow, I didn't even realize I was paying for this stuff. In fact, in some cases, they're paying for duplicate capability elsewhere in their environment as well. And you can kind of see here a snapshot of some of the different things that are included in that licensing. Now, our focus here is on that security and compliance capability, and these tools that are included within the E5 licensing are all designed to align with a zero trust methodology, and they're all designed to be modular as well. So just to kind of explain for those that aren't too familiar what zero trust is, you know, for many, many years, we employed a security strategy called the perimeter sort of security strategy. We built a network perimeter around all of our systems and data, and anything that was inside of that network perimeter was considered to be secure. Now, with the way that work has just kind of evolved over the last decade or so, we've got to a situation where users are working from, you know, different locations on different types of devices. Our organizations have adopted different cloud applications outside of that secure perimeter. And we've kind of ended up in a situation where we're collaborating in ways that we just never used to. So data ends up in all sorts of different locations. And because of that, moving it outside of that and network perimeter, which essentially is eroded at this point, the industry as a whole realized that a different approach was really required to build a scalable security model to protect our data regardless of where it is. So that's where zero trust kind of came into play. It's become an industry standard. It's not like a product, but different vendors, Microsoft included, have their own flavor of zero trust. In the old way of thinking, our control plane was the network itself. In this new world of zero trust, really, identities are our control plane, meaning that we can assess access to different resources based off of a lot of very granular pieces of information related to a user's identity and even the endpoint that they're connecting from. So, where are they? Who are they? What's their role? What's the health state of the endpoint they're on? All of this kind of information gets brought together to make a trust decision on whether we trust someone enough or not to give them access to different resources within the environment, regardless of where it is, what cloud, in the data center, you name it. Now, Microsoft's implementation of zero trust is built off of 6 pillars. The identities and endpoints on the left here are their foundational pillars of zero trust, and you can see the kind of tools from a security perspective that fit into those pillars. In the center is our gatekeeper, if you will, which is called conditional access. It's the engine at the heart of their zero trust strategy that makes all the decisions on access. And off to the right here, we see the other pillars of applications, data, infrastructure, and network, which is generally where an identity, which could be a user account, or it could be, like a service principal or an application, and some sort of device, be it an actual laptop, a workstation, a medical device, whatever it happens to be, is trying to connect with something on the right-hand side. And in order to safeguard this appropriately, we've got these different tools, a lot of which are included in the E5 license, that help actually enable this security model. So now that we've kind of explored it at this level, we're going to deep dive down a bit into some of these key security and compliance features that really do work together as an all-up security solution to protect against ransomware. Now, when I put this deck together, I realized I might have bitten off a little bit more than I can chew, because honestly, I could spend an hour talking about each of these individually. So what I've done is I've cherry-picked some of the things that I see as key to try and give you a look behind the curtain of each one. And Tony, my right hand over there, he's going to tap me on the shoulder if we start going a little bit too long on any of this stuff, but I think we'll be fine. So where we're going to start is by delving into Microsoft 365 Defender. And this is basically your security.microsoft.com portal that brings together all the tools. So basically anything with Defender in the name really rolls up into this portal now. And this provides what we would call the XDR capability, because the Sunday name for this is Microsoft 365 Defender XDR. And basically what that means is extended detection and response. Its job is to look at all of these different tools listed here, which we're going to be exploring as we kind of go through the presentation here. And it looks for alerts from each one that might be actually part of the same security incident, and it draws that together for you in this one security dashboard that we're going to see in a second here. And the idea is you're not left, in a situation where your security analysts are trying to hop between different dashboards to try and figure out what's related to what and what's going on. It's just presented to them in one kind of easy to view place. So, a little scenario here, opening the Microsoft 365 Defender portal in the morning. your security analyst will land here on the dashboard. And really, this dashboard presents a unified state of security, as I said, which includes things like top active threats, trends in the organization. It'll even surface to you security blogs and news about, new threat reports, and other kind of important stats really about just generally what's going on in the organization. And the dashboard will direct the security analyst to the next most important work item to focus on, such as like a high severity active incident or any remediation actions that are pending approval. Now, once upon a time, we all had alert queues with an average of like 1,000 threat encounters a day for a medium-sized organization. Alert queues became long and unwieldy and honestly unmanageable. So first and foremost, with Microsoft 365 Defender being like a full protection stack, which means it's not only able to identify but prevent threats as well from reaching the organization across your endpoints, email, cloud, and other common threat vectors. The collaboration across those different kind of domains that we saw amplifies the ability for Defender to be able to identify and block imminent threats, because all of that information is coming into one place and being looked at by AI and machine learning capabilities behind these tools. So with all of the kind of additional intelligence that's in here, it's estimated by Microsoft that about 70% of the potential encounters across all of your different potential threat vectors are completely prevented with no additional action actually required from the security team. So out of like 1,000 potential threat encounters that your organization could see on a daily basis, only say 30%, like 300 of them, actually end up as actionable alerts inside of Microsoft 365 Defender. And it's really cool, actually. It does surface to you the situations where it has just taken automated actions, whether it be against, phishing emails that have come into the organization and have made it through, or, something that's been identified on an endpoint, for example. I should clearly be clicking as I'm talking here. Now, for those remaining alerts, 365 Defender, as I mentioned, correlates it together so that we can understand what's related to the same attack. And that could be from all of the tools. It could be from our endpoint. It could be from Azure AD on the identity side. It could be from email. Because realistically, when a threat actor's going for your environment, they're not just trying to get at one thing. They're going to cross all of those different domains. So we need a way to join the dots between alerts from the different security tools, so that, like I say, we're not spinning between dashboards trying to figure out what's going on. And that kind of process in Microsoft language is an incident, a correlated selection of alerts. So, going back to what I said before, instead of like 300 individual alerts, instead your security team might just have 40 incidents to work on, which makes it way easier to manage and sort through and actually digest the information that's being presented. Now, one other cool thing that you get at the Microsoft 365 Defender level is this little tool here called Threat Analytics. It's another kind of dashboard in that security portal. Now, Microsoft's research teams, they work around the clock to identify threats on behalf of all of us. And Threat Analytics is an area where they'll actually provide detailed reports on like notable campaigns that are out there in the wild at the moment. And it'll give you information on how it actually is impacting your users and your environment. So, are there any open incidents related to it? Are my endpoints or users exposed to it? And then what proactive steps can I take to better secure myself against the threat? Like, it actually lays out all of that information in there, which is really powerful, honestly, because with all this stuff being integrated together, you can just instantly get that visibility, across the domains and into the configuration of the endpoints and that kind of thing. So that's kind of the like rolled up level of the Defender tools. Like I say, it all bubbles up into Microsoft 365 Defender, into our incident and alert dashboard. But let's now kind of come down the ladder a bit and start to talk about some of the Defender tools that sit underneath this 365 XDR umbrella, if you will. So the first one I'm going to talk about is Microsoft Defender for Office 365. This is the advanced email, message, and document protection capability within E5. So the attacks faced by your users are more advanced than ever, right? And that's why it's critical to have a solution in place that can provide effective prevention and early detection against threats. So, no solution's 100% effective. And that's one of the things that the zero trust methodology kind of recognizes. So we have to design things with the assumption that we might have actually already been breached. So essentially, this means that your security teams need the tools in place to be able to mitigate breaches quickly when an attack occurs, and your teams need to be able to investigate, hunt, and remediate when it matters the most. So awareness as well, that's not just simulations and training, but providing an experience inside of the actual Office products that your users are using so that they understand what they need to do. For example, we'll see things come through that say you've not received an email from this person before, or you don't often receive emails from this email address. Just things to kind of prompt the users to think before they kind of start clicking on things as well. Because at the end of the day, they're our kind of last line of defense. Now, drilling down into some of the different capabilities in Defender, behind Defender for Office is a multi-layered filtering stack. So if we look at this here, with the sort of prevention side of this, really the aim is to eliminate threats and attacks before they land in your inbox. Now, the first line of defense against threats is this filtering stack. A large percentage of the emails that get sent to Office 365 never even make it into the cloud environment, and that's thanks to the edge protection and the sender intelligence capabilities. The features within sender intelligence basically ensure that the senders are who they say they are. This helps catch spam, bulk spoofing attempts, and it plays a large role in phish detection as well. It provides protection against advanced attacks like business email compromise, impersonation attacks as well. They're pretty huge in the moment. And it does this with this kind of AI, I like to call it the hive mind machine learning from all the Office 365 environments. So anyone who's ever watched Star Trek, if you're familiar with the Borg, if one of those kind of android type cyborg people gets injured, the rest of them learn immediately what happened to that one to get injured so they can prevent an attack against themselves. Kind of the same deal with Office 365. So there you go. I bet you thought you'd never hear that comparison. When it happens in one environment, the learnings of that get propagated across all the Office 365 environments in the world. Now, content filtering takes a deeper look at the contents of the message. It'll examine things like links and files, as well as the email body, to look for any signs of suspicion. After emails are delivered, it continues to check the links at the time of click as well across all of the Office 365 mailboxes, and it'll remove any messages that are discovered that are actually found to be malicious or have ties to a broader campaign. Because sometimes what will actually happen is the threat actor will send out the email with like a completely benign link inside of it in order to evade detection of the content filters, and then they'll weaponize it after it's been delivered. So Defender's got a capability called ZAP, or Zero Hour Auto Purge, to help catch that scenario as well. Now, with Defender for Office, it does have some pre-configured standard and strict policies that you can use to configure all the, anti-spam, anti-phishing, anti-malware, that kind of thing. But for those of you that use custom policies in your environment, it's important that you can easily determine when your configurations don't meet best practice or are just like simply out of date. So inside of the kind of threat policies area, there is a configuration analyzer. It's pretty cool. It gives you an easy to use way of comparing your configurations that you have right now against recommendations. And it also lets your admins adopt more appropriate recommendations with a single click. So that's a really good one to look at. Now, I mentioned that attackers, they morph their attacks to avoid conventional security products. And in some cases, what might actually appear as hundreds of separate malicious messages is likely a coordinated campaign that's been designed to evade detection. So in Defender for Office, there's a feature called campaign views, and it uses AI to stitch together the attacks and actually show you where they originated from, how they were handled by the service, and whether any of your users interacted with them. Another feature here, priority account protection. It helps you keep track of users in your organization who are either like highly visible or highly targeted. So that could be your executives, your VIPs, your admins. And basically this priority account protection is built on the concept of tags. So with tags, your security teams can define their own attributes that they want to assign to users. And once you've assigned them, you'll see them surface throughout all of the different dashboards like Threat Explorer, campaign views, and more. And this is the Threat Explorer that we're seeing here. So this allows your security team to prioritize the response and making sure that they, protect the users who need it most first. And just talking about Threat Explorer, basically it's a tool that lets you do deep analysis into the mail traveling through your organization. So you can do everything from read the headers in the mail and analyze them, to actually viewing screenshots of what the other side of a URL that was detected as a phishing URL would look like. So lots of kind of valuable intel. Now, digging a little bit deeper on Explorer, it's got some bulk actions within it as well that add efficiencies to your security workflows. So for example, here we've selected 5 emails that we'd like to delete, and we've inputted a description and then can confirm that the action will be taken. And this is usually quite a good one because I show this to a lot of people and they say, oh man, I've been digging around inside Exchange Online trying to delete all these emails and I could have just done this. So that's quite a good trick there. Now, as I sort of said in the beginning, technology really is only part of the puzzle. Your end users are your human firewall. Defender for Office includes phish and malware simulation training that you can schedule to go out on a regular basis. And they've actually made it easy to track your organization's progress against a predicted compromise rate per simulation. So the rate reflects Microsoft's intelligence about the particular simulation you're running at a global level, as well as your organization's previous simulation performance. So this is akin to something you would see from like a KnowBe4 or something like that. And it's specifically only included in Defender for Office Plan 2, which is part of V5. So moving down the path onwards from Defender for Office, I'm going to talk about one of my favorites now, which is Defender for Endpoint. And this is way more than just an antivirus tool. I mean, you can see all the different kind of capabilities just on this view here. So let's kind of dive in on this. Now, Defender for Endpoint actually provides a centralized kind of security operations experience for both Windows and non-Windows platforms. Not a lot of people realize that all of this, like before, surfaces up in 365 Defender. And some of the interesting things to note in here, outside of Windows, we've got Mac and Linux, we've got Android and iOS, virtual infrastructure, but also network devices. This is a recent-ish addition. So if you've got any Cisco iOS, Juniper JunoOS, Aruba OS, Palo Alto, all of that stuff is actually supported for a level of protection from the Defender ecosystem as well. Another thing that a lot of people don't realize is that Defender for Endpoint includes really robust vulnerability management capabilities. And in some cases, we have customers who aren't really ready to go all in on Defender yet because they might have investments in other endpoint protection products still. And the really good news here is that Defender can actually be used alongside third-party products, and it adds a ton of value from a vulnerability management standpoint. So I really encourage you at the minimum to use this if you're licensed for it. Within Defender as well, on that more kind of proactive side of things, we have a capability called attack surface reduction rules. And they are hardening rules, and they basically prevent certain behaviors within the operating system. So for example, stopping Office from creating child processes. It adds a ton of extra security layers beyond the endpoint protection, because, you know, endpoint protection isn't 100%. 0 days, new threats are emerging all the time that can get past endpoint protection, regardless of who the vendor is. So in a way to kind of bid against that, we want to layer in as much additional proactive security capability as we can. And just a quick example, I saw a situation a few months ago when there was a piece of malware being sent out as an email attachment disguised as an encrypted email. And because it looked like an encrypted email file format, it was coming through all of the edge protection on some customers' networks. And when the end user would try and open the encrypted email, it would actually infect the endpoint and then create a whole bunch of rules inside their Outlook client to resend itself back out to the entirety of their address list. So we were seeing it jump between different organizations for a period of weeks there until, well, days really, until the actual edge vendors, if you will, whether it was Microsoft or Proofpoint or whoever, were able to put something in place to detect it. And the one thing that we had going in our favor to help protect against this particular threat, because it was able to it was new, it was unknown, was the attack surface reduction rule, because it immediately blocked Outlook from being able to create child processes, right? So the malware didn't have a way to kind of replicate itself and send itself back out. So highly recommend looking at these. These are extremely powerful things that are in your toolbox. Now, more into, you know, Defender as a primary product kind of worldview. You've got network protection, which is part of Defender for Endpoint as well. And this actually blocks known malicious URLs and IPs. Microsoft Security Threat Intelligence is adding to their list all the time. It gives you the ability to build custom lists as well. And this feature is actually used by another tool we're going to talk about called Defender for Cloud Apps to block unsanctioned applications that you don't want your users accessing. But I'll touch on that more in a little bit here. Now, alongside the network protection side of things, we also have web content filtering. It's pretty simple. It's category based, and essentially you can define categories that you don't want your users to access, like gambling, for example, and you're not reliant on something on the edge of your network to provide this content filtering capability. It's done by Defender for Endpoint itself, so it doesn't matter where the user takes their device. You're always going to be able to block access to, you know, the different site categories on it. Now, I mentioned this is way more than a basic antivirus. Defender actually performs behavioral profiling of your devices. You know, it'll baseline the system and it'll monitor processes for suspicious activity. If it identifies an issue, it will take action to stop threats in its tracks. And you can tune, you know, whether it does everything automated and just kind of goes for it, or if you would like it to ask for permission first before making changes. But there's a lot of automation in there that's just there out of the box. I do get asked a lot, though, if all this kind of machine learning capability causes a performance hit. And the answer to that is no, actually, because some of this machine learning and AI capability is completely offloaded to the cloud backend. And that's, you know, the benefit of using this level of service with Defender. Now, the way the behavior monitoring works, a little bit of a double click here. Essentially, instead of the old way of doing things where we just compared the signatures of files to a database, it's actually going down to the level of looking at, you know, what's going on in the registry. How is a service or a process behaving? You know, is it doing different things at the command line that aren't expected? Is it adding things to memory? All that kind of stuff. And it does it, you know, dynamically in nature, not just comparing it to like a static database, as I say. Now, this talks about ransomware, so I have to mention tamper protection. This is another fantastic feature that is extremely important to enable. Long story short, ransomware threats have been known to disable the endpoint protection capabilities on their target, and tamper protection helps safeguard against that. So highly recommend turning that on in your environment as well. Now, going back to that kind of behavioral side of Defender. It's not just on the detection side, it's on the remediation side as well. And there's a couple of different things to take note of in here. The cloud backend does power a lot of this to do the anomaly detection. As I mentioned, it's essentially automated incident response to a certain level. And it reacts really fast. So for example, if it detects a threat on, say, patient 0 within the environment and blocks it, then within 1 to 5 minutes, it'll immediately be going around all the other devices and blocking the same threat if it's there. And they also have this interesting feature they've added called shadow protection. It was in preview. I'm not sure if it's generally available yet or not, but essentially, if you have Defender for Endpoint as the secondary product alongside something else, going back to that, some folks are still in contract with other tools, then it actually adds an additional protection layer in that situation as well, and looks to kind of block or prevent malicious behavior in the background that a third-party primary product might miss, essentially. Now, drilling down a little bit into this automated investigation and response capability, really the way that it works is it's designed to be kind of like your own little virtual tier 1 SOC person, and it looks to mimic a human in investigating and resolving certain threats automatically, rather than just isolating things immediately. And all of these investigations that take place, going back to our 365 Defender, you can see them in that dashboard and get a really good view of what happened. And if you've set it to ask for permission to do certain things, then you can authorize it to take actions at that point. Now, Defender for Endpoint actually has really deep integration with Microsoft Intune to enable security management across all platforms. So security baselines are another awesome form of proactive security, both for Windows and Office, and they're a collection of pre-canned hardening settings. So a little bit different to attack surface reduction rules, although there is actually some of them in the security baselines. Attack surface reduction is designed to stop processes and such like from performing certain actions, whether it's Adobe Reader or Office or something else. There's a lot of them. Security baselines are more around like locking down some of the settings that are just kind of open on Windows out of the box. Anytime someone's doing something with Intune and building out a configuration for Windows, I always recommend they do these first. Now, between the two products, Defender and Intune, we can do security posturing of all of our devices to make sure that they're meeting our security controls through compliance policies. There's also a security tasks dashboard that gives your endpoint management team a place where they can work on issues that have been identified by the security team, such as out-of-date software, for example. The security team can request remediation from within the Security Defender dashboard, and it actually populates a ticket into Intune itself, and optionally your ticketing system as well. And it even gives your endpoint folks some actionable steps to follow to remediate whatever the issue is, whether it's updating the software or making a Windows configuration change. Now, the endpoint security settings that I'm talking about, they can either be applied directly via Intune, or believe it or not, you can actually apply them via the Defender for Endpoint sensor on devices that are not enrolled into Intune. For example, maybe you've got a Windows server that's sitting in your DMZ that you want to apply these security policies to. It will do that through the Defender for Endpoint sensor. So it provides a really centralized security management experience. And the ability to keep watch on all of your organization's vulnerabilities within Defender for Endpoint and then enforce the remediations with Intune is extremely powerful if you use them together. Now, Defender also has a robust partner ecosystem behind it. So, whether it's integrations with platforms like ServiceNow, reporting capabilities like Power BI, or even enabling managed detection and response through, services like the ones that we actually do through our partner Blackpoint Security. All of that is possible due to the way Microsoft's engineered the back end of this. So moving on from Defender for Endpoint, we're going to talk a little bit more now about another tool called Defender for Identity. Now, in my opinion, this is one of the most overlooked Defender tools in E5 that's geared towards protecting your on-premise Active Directory. So this is an example of a real attack which helps to show how attackers exploit vulnerabilities and move through an organization's environment, both on-premise and in the cloud. So most security teams review the data from on-premise and cloud environments separately, and that can make it very difficult to correlate information between both environments to see the full scope of an attack. So let's look at how an attack in this environment might occur. So in this case, they granted access to an admin user where the account wasn't actually protected with multi-factor authentication. I still see that a lot. Using this compromised account, they had the ability to search through email and SharePoint documents, and they were able to exfiltrate data by creating automated rules. This gave them access to the cloud environment, but they also found a way to pivot into the on-premise environment. The attacker found VPN credentials as part of the email searched and used these to log on to the on-premise environment. Once there, they were able to gain access and move laterally to further compromised environment. And as they move laterally, they can find and compromise additional users, find ones with greater privileges, and eventually find a user account with admin rights so they can actually stretch and take over the whole organization. And at this point, really, the threat actor is very well positioned to deploy a ransomware payload. Now, unfortunately, the path that these attackers took doesn't really take long to traverse, as you can see here. So really, your security team needs to understand the full scope of these types of attacks from on-premise all the way to the cloud, and that's where Defender for Identity can help. It uses cloud-powered intelligence, essentially, to secure your on-premise Active Directory identities. So this means that, no matter where you're at on your journey to cloud adoption, you can protect that complete kind of hybrid environment through your Defender E5 licensing. Now, the way it works is it basically monitors your domain controllers by capturing and parsing network traffic and Windows security events directly from them. It analyzes the data for attacks and threats. This could be multiple domains, multiple forests. It can stretch over both. And it doesn't matter how complex your on-prem environment is, it can provide coverage for it. And essentially what it does is it takes all of the information that it gathers, it feeds it up into Defender in the cloud, and that uses its machine learning intelligence to look for things like lateral movement attacks and other attacks that might be actually performed against Active Directory itself, anything that's kind of going through those domain controllers. Additionally, you can put the sensor on ADFS servers as well. So all of this rolls up into your Microsoft 365 Defender, and again, it's kind of showed to you in a unified way in there.
Hey, Gareth, I'm just going to say maybe 5 more minutes of presenting, so we got some time to answer questions at the end.
Yeah, for sure. I knew this was kind of ambitious, the amount of stuff we were trying to cram in, but I think we'll make it. I might skip a couple of things, but I think we'll make it.
All right.
Don't want to go too fast at the same time. So, yeah, with Defender for Identity, out of the box, like one of the things that I find really gives a lot of value for our customers is as soon as you turn it on, it'll actually perform an identity security posture assessment. And you can see the different things here that it will actually benchmark you on. And all of this gets surfaced up into your Microsoft Secure Score. If you've never looked at your Secure Score, I highly recommend looking at that as well, because it does have a lot of kind of low-hanging fruit in it sometimes to really boost the security posture of your Office 365 environment. But yeah, for me, with most of the folks that I start working with E5, this is the first place we start when it comes to Defender for Identity, over and above the additional protection it gives you that I described a moment ago there. So jumping through with the last few minutes that we have here, let me see. I am going to actually just pivot into some compliance stuff for you, because we've talked a lot about security, and I want to make sure that we cover compliance. So inside of your E5 licensing, you have a thing called Microsoft Purview. It includes information protection, insider risk management, and data loss prevention, all on the same platform. And these tools are actually pretty critical for protecting against your double and triple extortion ransomware attacks, because as we talked about, the threat actor will look to try and exfiltrate a copy of your data from the environment. So with that said, you know, if you use the information protection and the data loss prevention together, you're actually able to discover and automatically classify data in the environment that's sensitive, so that you can prevent it from unauthorized use of different policies. As well as that, using information protection and insider risk management together, it can help you understand like the user intent of what they're actually trying to do around sensitive data, and look for users that might be kind of like the most critical risk in the organization. And if you were to, you know, again, this is a big triangle of tools here. If you were to use insider risk management and data loss prevention together, then you can enable a feature called adaptive protection, which assigns appropriate data loss prevention policies based on the perceived risk level of a user. So to kind of quickly try and drive that home here, essentially, instead of trying to create a data loss prevention policy that's a one size fits all, this capability will look at the risk level of a user based on their behavior in your environment and actually apply an appropriate policy based on the risk level. Now, for some organizations, they might not have even really started to lean into data loss prevention yet. So whether you've already got the basics in place and this is maybe a next step for you, or you know, if you've just not made the step at all, highly recommend looking at the compliance side of your tools as well, because they are really powerful. Now we're going to send these slides out, and there's a few here that we just, I guess, never budgeted enough time to get to. I was being quite ambitious with the amount of content that I've got in here. So just some real quick best practices. Use those attack surface reduction rules. Do it in audit mode. The audit mode lets you make sure it's not going to block anything that you don't want it to block, so that you can kind of fine tune that. Also look at a feature called control folder access. This one's really important to stop ransomware attacks. Basically, it's a Windows setting that stops processes from modifying certain system files or other folders that you recommend, or sorry, other folders that you specify. Data loss prevention, we've already talked a little bit about that. And, you know, using Defender for Endpoint and the other Defender tools, honestly, to really monitor what's going on in your environment. Even if it's maybe not the primary tool you're using, there's still a lot of value you can derive from that licensing through that. Now, real quick, before we pivot into questions here, I just want to let you guys know that we're actually offering a free limited time offer. So for any organization that's looking to get started with the Defender tools or Intune, we're actually offering a free 6-hour proof of concept workshop. This is a pretty awesome way just for your teams to bootstrap their adoption of the tools and give them some training at the same time. I usually have more than an hour to talk about them as well, so you know, we can fit a bit more in. We've got kind of limited spaces left on it. We're booking up pretty fast, but we've reserved some of the capacity for Health ISAC members. I know we'll be sending out these slides after the presentation, so just reply back and let us know if you think that would be valuable. So with that, we'll kind of pivot into a little Q&A session here before we run out of time. There's a Q&A button at the top of your Teams where you should be able to submit questions, and we'll do our best to answer some stuff live here. Anything we don't get to, you know, we can follow up on separately over email for sure. All right, Tony and Tyler, I'll pass it back to you.
All right. Thanks, Gareth, and it's awesome content that you were providing there. I do have some questions here that we can go over. So just for the sake of time, we'll go ahead and dive in. Can you share some examples of how healthcare organizations have successfully utilized the security features of Microsoft 365 E5 to protect against ransomware?
Yeah, for sure. Well, straight in with the serious ones. All right. So I would say Defender for Endpoint. That's definitely one of the big ones, especially with the vulnerability management side of it. Because regardless of what endpoint protection you're using, it can give you really good insights into vulnerabilities that you might not even be aware of on your devices from old software and patches that are missing and that kind of thing, which are a gateway in for ransomware attacks. Controlled folder access as well. I mentioned that a second ago. That's a big one. And if you deploy that, so you've got file servers on your network and you enable controlled folder access, you could specify specific like shares essentially on that server, and really lock them down so that only the processes that are supposed to interact with them can. So that's another big one to just stop the locking or the encryption of those files. Those are probably the two big ones I'd call out off the top of my head.
How many companies or do you know how many companies are using the entire MS solution, and what is the success rate?
Sorry, say that again, Tyler. You broke up a bit there.
My apologies. How many companies are using the entire MS solution, and what is the success rate?
How many? Wow. Certainly, I would say if I was to look across our spread of customers, and maybe our view might be a bit slanted just because we only really deal with the endpoint management, security, and compliance features, I would say probably 90% of the organizations we personally work with have E5 licensing. But at the same time, we're seeing a lot more kind of starting to move towards it just because of the value of, adopting the complete suite of tools has over buying best of breed products or other products from, multiple different vendors and trying to stitch it together as a solution.
Okay. And what are some common challenges healthcare organizations might face when trying to implement and optimize their Microsoft 365 E5 license, and how can they overcome them?
Resistance to change, probably due to workflow disruptions as the way we work changes maybe on some of the new tools. And I'm talking like generally across the board, like even on the productivity side. And really the solution to that is just kind of gradually implement stuff in waves. Do a lot of staff training as you adopt some of the different security, compliance, and productivity tools. Have champions in different areas of the business to make sure you kind of transition as smoothly as possible. I think one of the other challenges as well can be compliance concerns, especially when it comes to patient data and dealing with that inside of the Microsoft cloud. But you've got tools like Compliance Manager, which comes as part of Purview, where you can actually run assessments to ensure that you are adhering to regulations like HIPAA.
Awesome. Have you heard anything related to fileless malware being a blind spot for the Microsoft 365 Defender platform?
I would say no, actually, because the behavioral capabilities to aid like the detection of threats, because they're dynamic in nature, I'd say they're very effective against that type of malware.
Yeah, and another note on that is some of Microsoft's marketing practices are a little questionable. So when we hear things like that, most people are talking about Windows Defender, which is an antivirus software, and antivirus software in general is vulnerable to that type of attack. And then real quick, there was one question down kind of at the bottom. I just want to make sure we don't miss. Someone's asking how to find the M365 policies in the portal.
Yeah, so I'm presuming that'll be on the security with the Defender side of things. So if you go to security.microsoft.com and really the two main places to look for some of the stuff we've covered today. If you look under the email and collaboration section, you'll see a thing that says policies and rules. If you click on that and then click on threat policies, that'll get you into one of the places. And then the other one, Defender for Endpoint, which was another big topic today. If same portal, scroll all the way at the bottom on the left, click on settings, endpoints, and you'll see in there a lot of client settings specific to Defender for Endpoint, like advanced feature settings and that kind of thing. Those are probably some of the key places to start. But if I didn't capture that right, feel free just to reply back when we send out these slides and I can give you some more information.
Great. I think we may have time here for one more question. I'm not sure. Tony, did you have any other comments or anything before we get to that last question? I want to leave some time on the docket. Okay. Let's get to this. So, could you elaborate on the role of expert support services in enhancing the cybersecurity measures of a healthcare organization using Microsoft 365? You can get to that one pretty quickly.
Yeah, for sure. So, if folks are looking at expert support services, I mean, they can really help offer a deeper understanding of a lot of the features that are inside of E5 and make sure that you're using it to its full potential. And whether that's from like just an ask an expert kind of support level, or if you're looking for more hands-on management to make sure that your configurations are set in a way that's really going to maximize the product and protect you. And I guess, assistance from a regulatory compliance standpoint, we want to make sure that you're using these tools in a way that meets all the standards to avoid any potential legal issues. But yeah, the core of it is these tools are pretty complex. There's a lot to them. So if you can work with someone that is basically living in them every day, then it's going to go a long way to make sure that you're maximizing your implementation and the level of protection you're getting from them.
Awesome. All right. Well, I guess that concludes our Q&A session. I just wanted to provide some closing comments here. Definitely appreciative of the information and insight you provided today, Gareth. And thank you, Tony, as well, for joining and helping us out here. I'd also, most importantly, like to thank our attendees for joining. We had a little under 60 attendees join us. We had a pretty good, decent turnout. And with that, I hope everyone enjoys the remainder of their week and take care. Have a great day.
Yeah, thanks, everyone. And when we send the slides out, if you see a topic in there that I didn't get time to cover and you'd like to know more, happy to just jump on a call and talk through it with you. It's not a problem. So I appreciate everyone's time.
Thanks all.